Welcome to Your College Bound Kid,
a podcast for parents, college counselors, students, and anyone who wants a weekly deep dive into the world of college admissions.
My name is Julia. I was an admission officer at Haverford College, an outside reader for Emory University, and I currently work as a school-based counselor at a school in Massachusetts.
I'm Lisa, and I'm a clinical psychologist and college counselor. I have a daughter in college, a daughter in high school, and a son in middle school. After 30 years in Chicago, we recently moved to North Carolina.
My name is Mark. I'm a college coach in Atlanta and the parent of two daughters. Karis, a graduate of Davidson College, and she is the founder of the Spanish tutoring company, SpanishHelpToday.com. And Joy is a wellness coach at the Keenan Flagler Business School at the University of North Carolina in Chapel Hill. And I'm so blessed to be able to work alongside both my beautiful daughters at School Match for You, college counseling firm that I founded in 2010. On this week's episode, Drew and I answer the hardest question that any listener has ever sent into Your College-Bound Kid. It has to do with whether a student at an independent school should work with an independent education consultant, also known as an IEC. The question is so nuanced that we broke our record for our longest recording ever for one question. Then you'll get a second question as Lisa and Lynda answer a question about what online tools are the most helpful in the college search. And finally, the final part of Lisa's interview with Adrienne Amador-Oddi, the Vice President of Strategic Enrollment and Communications at Queen's University, Charlotte. And Adrienne is doing a spotlight for us on Queen's University, Charlotte. Friends, a few weeks ago, I was jubilant because I announced that Hillary Dickman from Colorado College is going to lead a case study discussion with other college admission reps. And we're going to make it available for you to read actual applications that will have been anonymized. And you're going to have to decide what student would you admit, what student would you deny, what student would you waitlist. In other words, we're going to simulate you being part of an admissions committee. And then you'll vote using a Google form, and we'll see who our listeners would have admitted from the three applicants. Well, Hillary and I had a call just about an hour ago to work on some of the details because I wanted to give you an update. And I am stoked on steroids. Yeah, I actually made that up because Hillary improved the vision that I had. My original vision was parents and students read the file, vote online, pick your admitted, your waitlisted, denied student, and then listen to the conversation that Hillary will have with a few other Colorado College admission officers about how they see these applicants. But let me tell you how Hillary improved it. She said, can I pull together 3 to 5 parents to join the admission officers? Because when I've done this with parents, they're great because parents just bring things up that we sometimes don't think of. And so it took me back to, as a kid, my favorite movie, which I watched with Karis when we were at Airbnb in Helen, Georgia, about 5 weeks ago. Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory. That was my favorite movie as a kid. 5 of our listeners are going to get the golden ticket to participate in this discussion, which will air on our podcast. So here's the timeline. So I'm going to select the 5 people this week, maybe even today. Maybe by the time you hear it, you would have already known if you were selected. Just people that interact with me a lot that are podcast listeners. Hillary has committed to get the anonymized files to me in time to get them up on our website, yourcollegeboundkid.com, by August 15th. And we'll put that up under the resources tab, along with the Google form for you to vote. You got to select one to admit, one to deny, one to waitlist. The actual recording will be done before September 15th. That'll be done by video, but we'll air the audio version on the podcast, and we'll see if we can put the video version up online. And here's another way Hillary's making it better. She's not just using Colorado College. She's actually pulling together some reps from some different colleges to get some different perspectives. So I'm so excited about this. I don't even know what to do with myself, but more details to come.
And now it's time for a question from one of our listeners.
Friends, we have never had a question from a listener where we talked for over an hour and 15 minutes. But that's what Julie and I did on this question from a listener because there's just so much nuance and we didn't want you to miss. So we're going to chunk it out over the next 3 weeks into apportionments of 23 to 25 minutes. And it's now time to hear part 1 of 3. All right, Julia, you ready to take on the beast of the question?
It's a great question. I'm so glad it was asked.
It's a great, so before we play this question, I have to share something. You guys know I wrote a book, 171 Answers to the Most Asked College Admissions Questions. I had a chapter on this in my book. And I said in that chapter, like, this is the hardest question I get. Honestly, to me, it's so complicated. It's so nuanced. You know, there's some hard questions we have. Like the last time we talked about, do you submit your 33 to this school? Like those are hard questions. Sometimes I find whether someone should apply ED is a hard question.
Oh, totally.
You know what I mean? Because of all the different factors there with money and all these different things. That can be a tough one. But anyway, our listeners like, what's the question? So let's play it.
Hi, Mark. I was listening to episode 514, where you discussed when a student should start the college process. Around minute 25, you mentioned families at independent or private schools who are getting great counseling but might still find value in working with a college coach. You hinted that this could be a tricky issue that you had some do's and don'ts about, but weren't going to delve into those since it wasn't the focus of the episode. I'm hoping you can address this topic in a future episode. My son attends a small independent school with about 60 students per grade, and the school has 2 experienced college counselors. However, these counselors have very strongly advised against hiring an independent counselor or SA support, stressing their credentials and experience and citing concerns about it complicating their work, questioning the financial investment, and saying it could make the process harder. That said, after presenting these caveats, they've suggested that if we do decide to pursue outside help, we should definitely let them know. While I understand their concerns, I hesitate to bring it up directly because I worry it might be seen as a lack of trust in their expertise. My son has ADHD and executive function challenges, and I feel he could really benefit from the support of an independent counselor for college essay support, particularly in managing the writing process. We'd appreciate any tips on how to approach this situation effectively. Specifically, we're looking for advice on how to balance doing what's best for our son while maintaining a positive, collaborative relationship with the school counselors who will ultimately be doing the bulk of the college counseling work, including being responsible for writing recommendation letters and determining which students at our small school to recommend to which colleges. Thank you for your wonderful podcast, and I look forward to hearing your insights.
Maybe we can start with, I don't know, do you want to do pros and cons? Because I see both sides of this.
Yeah, and I think I would love to be, especially because I think the listeners know this, but the group of us on this podcast represent all parties, right? We've got consultants or IECs, right? We've got school-based counselors. We have IECs that were school-based counselors, and then we have admission officers, right?
Yeah. And I did CBL work, which is slightly different, but the same,
Still, So like so we all have different vantage points and experiences. And it is like, even put the students aside, this is probably one of the hottest topics in selective college admissions, college counseling, right? So I also think it's helpful for like, if the listeners don't know, but like the whole reason you and I are doing this podcast is because of having these conversations about sort of an IEC working with a school-based counselor. Not so much in like, so if folks don't know, but like when Mark was still representing KIPP Atlanta students who came to Milton Academy and they were boarding school students, the way I got to know Mark, even though we've been floating around each other, is that we co-counseled his students together. And by the way, I got to see one of our students last Friday.
Male
Mark,
or female?
Male. He was a 2020 graduate, so they did like a special like.
So there was one that was trying to decide between Georgia Tech and Amherst, and there's one that went to Morehouse. Okay, that one. Okay,
very happy.
Okay. Yeah, good.
So in that sense, and at this point too, Mark, you were doing private counseling work, IEC work. So as much as you and I work together in the capacity,
because we did both. Like,
yeah,
you know, the student that went to Vanderbilt, that was my IEC hat.
Yeah.
And the one that went to Morehouse was my IEC hat.
Yep. So there you go.
But then some of the other ones that went, I think there was 5. I think we were together with 5 or 6. The other ones were my KIP CBO. So we partnered together both as a CBO and an IEC.
Yep.
But so that shows it can work. But there are a lot of potential pitfalls.
Yes.
There are, put it this way.
And I think you should be honest, Mark. You're welcome to say things about school-based counselors.
Well, no, I'm going to be totally honest here. So it can present complications. I'll tell a quick story. So there's a program called A Better Chance, and they place kids at, schools all across the country. And people were going through A Better Chance and they weren't getting placed. And then they were coming to me and they were getting placed. And so I reached out to their highest level, all the way to the top. And I was like, is there a way that we can work together? And it went all the way to the top, and they came back and said, no, because you can't have 2 attorneys and you can't have 2 quarterbacks. And so it does present some complications especially if people aren't talking to each other. And then it's difficult because, Julia, we've talked about this a lot. Like, there are a lot of people that hang their shingle as an IEC.
Yes.
And they don't know what they're doing, and they're giving your kids bad advice.
Right.
And you have the local school-based knowledge, and that's not being respected.
Right.
And sometimes people don't respect the school-based counselor because of a lot of reasons. One of the things is just the school-based counselor is honest with them about the college list, and they're offended by that.
Yes.
And so they're like, that's not what I wanted to hear. So then they go try to find someone that they think will tell them what they want to hear. That's the same thing I struggle with an IEC.
Yep.
So there are a lot of reasons why I understand that school-based counselors don't like it when somebody hires an IEC.
Yep.
But on the other hand, like, I work with a lot of people that are at independent schools, and they usually come back with the second kid.
Mm-hmm.
And some of the things that people do like is the fact that they can meet you at 10 at night. You'll work on a Sunday, and people want to start the college process months before their independent school starts their process. And like, I just had a client recently that said to me, that's at a independent school. And they said, their counselor said, if you want someone to work with you Sunday at 10 o'clock or all through the summer, we're not going to do that. So go get you an IEC. So there are some times when it can make sense. I think it's best if you can communicate, but that doesn't always work because sometimes it's like, why you got me? Why would you go hire somebody else? You think I'm chopped liver? And then I think in some cases it can work against you. And if you have somebody like Julia, who's in the top 1% of counselors, in my opinion, out there. No, I'm serious. That's how I feel about you. Oof. I mean that.
Wow.
And not only that, you have a smaller caseload. You have the school context. Like, why it wouldn't make sense to go get an IEC that's not going to have that school context or the breadth of knowledge. Mm. But the problem is not everybody's a Julia. So anyway, I've said a lot. Tell me where you want to go with this, Julia.
No, I think, and I really struggle with this. And I think, so I'm going to be just very blunt.
I want you to. And you and I talk about this all the time. So you're not going to say anything that we haven't said off air.
We do. And honestly, for the listeners, I very much I am in constant communication with Mark and others from the podcast. We're always asking each other questions, so, but I find myself having to defend when I get an answer from an IEC to my school-based counselors, because I will just be honest. Overwhelmingly, my students I'm going to start my 10th year in college counseling. Overwhelmingly, each of my caseloads have had half of my students, or maybe a little bit more, maybe a little less, have an IEC. I have never had a positive experience with an IEC outside of the folks on this podcast. and one or two other area IECs in my area who happened to be school-based counselors before they went to become one. And this is not to say that IECs are all bad or like things like that. I'm just going to acknowledge that the fervor that you're hearing from your school is from a lot of experience. I will also say this. Every time I've had a student who's worked with an IEC, it has absolutely detrimentally affected their applications in my job. Where I actually spend more time. We've run the numbers in my schools. I spend more time with students who have an IEC than students who don't have one. And a lot of it is spent because, sort of like you said, Mark, like a lot of the IECs in my area tend to be a mother who went through the process with her child and has never been an admission officer or never been a college counselor. And so some of the advice they give is very different than the advice I would give. And the family is like, oh gosh, we're spending, $300 an hour on this person, and a lot of people will say like, my clients went to Brown, Stanford, Harvard, right? And so the kid feels very much torn between. And so I spend a lot of time, again, present company excluded, I spend a lot of time undoing what the IEC has done. And then on top of that, it creates a really bad relationship with me, the family, and the student, where it is exactly what you said, Mark. Either the IEC is making the student feel a certain way, I'm making the student feel a certain way. We're just trying to guide the student, but now we're caught up in personality politics. And I don't think a lot of IECs that I've worked with, or many really at all, understand school context. And what will also happen is that because our relationship erodes, or you're relying on the IEC for some other things that I need to work with you on, I'm not able to write as strong a letter because you didn't come in and get to know me. Like I'm a transaction to you, just like your IEC. And school-based counselors, friends, we don't get paid very much, just to let you know. I could literally, Mark has painted the picture of what I could have in life. And so I'm not saying that I wouldn't choose that. I'm saying that I'm a school-based counselor because I really love students and I want to tell your story and I want to know you. I've literally never disliked a student. I love my students. And it's really disheartening for me when I'm just a transaction to you, or I'm just your adversary. And that usually comes about with the relationship with an IEC. That being said, I think it could be beautiful and lovely and in fact, Mark, I've absolutely relied on for having Atlanta-based information or Georgia-based information. Like at this point in time, it's been great working at boarding schools. They'll be like, oh, what about this scholarship and that? Everyone's like, how do you know that? I'm like, well, Mark Stucker told me about it. But also having really clear rules. So I think there's some colleges private high schools we've talked about that actually have a policy in place that say, if you would like to use we don't think you need an outside counselor. This is the whole purpose that we have people employed here just for your children. But if you do get one, please do the following. I know of one independent high school that literally won't write a letter of recommendation for the child if they find out they are working with an IEC. I will be honest with you. I think that's a little extreme. I think that's not fair. I think if the child goes to your school, it is you should support the child and provide necessary documentation. But the schools do go out swinging like this and do have very clear policies because 99.9% of the time, and I'm not exaggerating, it is a bad experience for the school-based counselor with a student who's engaged in IEC.
Yeah, it's to me, it's really complicated and it's case by case.
Yeah.
Like you started by saying, like, we work together really well with 5 kids.
Yep.
So like, why was it that we were able to work? Why was it that we were able to work really well together it was either 5 or 6, I can remember 5. So why do you think that was the case?
I think you were formerly a school-based counselor. I think that's a big thing. The other thing too is, a lot of IECs are part of this, but that you should check their professional networks, right? Are they a part of,
there's ICA,
yes, thank you.
So those are the 2
things like that. And
But I'll be really honest. It's really simple to get approved by those
That's what I mean.
organizations.
Yeah.
It's like
So,
it's really a
beyond,
low bar to be approved by that. To be
yeah,
honest,
but
really
technically
is.
you're bound by similar ethics as I am, right?
Yeah.
And should be said, this is not true of most IECs, but I've also had IECs that have actually jeopardized my students' outcomes at colleges because they've done fraudulent things. So being in a membership like that does protect the student a little bit. But either way, so I think just checking what is their background. Do they have an admissions or school-based background, or how long have they been doing this work and who did they do it for, right?
Mm-hmm.
I do think though, there are also, and so I think that's why we work well together. I also think, Mark, and a lot of the IACs on this podcast and in our groups and our networks are like the most professional and lovely. And in fact, I was just telling Mark about this before we started recording. In the last 12 hours, I got 4 requests from various people I know asking for an IEC. And I always have the same 5 I'm recommending because I know that these are ethical people. 2 of those people are actually never have been a school-based counselor. They did work in admissions, but they've literally counseled in the area in selective college admissions for like 30 years. And I've worked with them. I'll say this too. I think like you said earlier too, Mark, like open communication, like the last thing I actually really want is, yes, it really does annoy me, some of this behavior, but the last thing I want is the child to be feeling like in the middle of things or to feel bad about this process. So if often the best sort of relationships I've had with IACs is sort of like, here's your expertise, here's mine. We're on at the same time with the student. We're on at the same time with the family. So everything is being said. Or just I'm curious maybe about the regional offerings for the students, where Mark would be curious about how did Milton deal with this?
Mm-hmm.
Like, how is that student context? I had another Milton student that I once talked to Mark and his team about, and I gave this whole rundown about why
Mm-hmm.
their extracurricular at Milton was really important. That would be something you might not know if you don't have school-based information. And the person that my former student worked with on Mark's team is a much better essay editor than I am, and really pulled out some great work from that student. So I do think, especially in this question, I do think it's not necessarily a non-starter that you shouldn't consider it or engage. I definitely think there are times, especially if your child has executive functioning challenges, I actually really think that does make sense, that I can't handhold. And in fact, if I did handhold, I'm terrible with boundaries, y'all. I would all of a sudden, I'd be like, oh gosh, these are all my ideas, huh? Whoops, I got handed. So I do think I did once had a student who did have significant executive functioning issues. Guess what? He had an executive functioning coach, and I worked with that person on making sure that they got their college stuff ready. So that person gave me really good tools about how should I present a timeline? How should I present deadlines? How can I help the student craft the essay? But that wasn't an IEC. They weren't like, I'm going to, so I do think you could also find a medium. But I do think there are times where it is possible. I've actually had, while I'm happy to help with essay prep and do a lot of brainstorming, I worked at schools that don't have a program for essay writing.
Mm-hmm.
And so there has been times where I've had students that worked with an IEC just for their Common App essay. And that actually was really helpful for them. And it was really helpful for me because I was sort of reading the polished versions, and it freed up my time to do other things with them. And it also, it was just very helpful for them because they weren't getting they weren't list building, or I think they were doing some more of the nitty gritty pieces that sometimes it is a little helpful to have more people supporting you than just one.
I think you bring up a lot of good points. The school-based piece is important. I'm thinking of other really good relationships I have with other school-based counselors besides you, where I've worked with them, and several things. One is we do communicate with each other.
Yep.
And I can think of 2 different people. I'm kind of the bad cop because
that's why I like you as well too. So I'm not always the bad cop.
Yeah, like they've said, in one case, it's a mutual friend of ours, and he was like, this kid is not getting into Georgetown. I'm going to tell you right now, if
Yeah.
you could get him off of thinking he's getting in, that would be extremely helpful for me.
Yeah.
So I really emphasize that tremendously, right? And then the one thing that is extremely important is I'm always supporting the local counselor, because
you are always. Yeah.
I mean, people say, they make their little comments like, I cannot believe they thought this was all I'm worth, like putting this probable, and I'm, this is where you have to say, we have a lot of evidence,
Right.
a lot of data. You don't know what they might have had a conversation where the school has said, we really want to get a kid from you this year or whatever, So it's really important to coach them on how to work most effectively with the school counselor. One of the problems that happens sometimes, not always, but sometimes the IEC makes little undercutting remarks about the school counselor.
Yeah, all the time.
And that's terrible. Like, you can't do that. Like, you should be building up that school-based counselor and encouraging the student to build that relationship and talk about how important that relationship is.
Right.
And that's really important. And I do think a lot of times IECs are very critical of school-based counselors not wanting people to have IECs, but I think that they're really being naive, because those same IECs wouldn't like it if somebody had another IEC.
Right. Right.
They really wouldn't. And so, to the extent to which you can communicate with each other, I find it to be extremely helpful.
Totally.
Because I can say to the school-based counselor and say, okay, what are the things that you want me to emphasize with this student? And they can feel like they have another voice saying the same thing, and we can get on the same page. Or I can also say, what are the school, like, we can collaborate on the list even, and because I don't want to be dissuading somebody from a school that the school-based counselor is in for. Like, I'm like, they're recommending it for a reason. You probably should, so you can just really reinforce. It's hard when you can't communicate. And sometimes it's hard to communicate because, I think we have to be honest. There are a lot of school-based counselors that it's probably not going to be in your best interest for them to know that they do have an IEC. Like, that wouldn't you agree, Julia? Like, that could work against you if they share that.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I would say the majority of times, unless.
I would agree. Absolutely.
Yeah. And the majority of the times, unless, like, I have one I work with and she's like, I have no problem with people having an IEC as long as they tell me.
Right.
And that person actually means it. Like, I haven't seen any sort of vengeance or vindictiveness, but there are some people that, and in some cases for good reasons, not just for vindictive reasons, like, they're going to maybe look at you a little differently if you have an IEC. So I do think it's risky for somebody just going into their school-based counselor and saying, I've got an IEC.
Big time.
So it's hard because as a family, how are you to navigate this?
Right. And how do you best serve, like, none of that best serve.
Because all you care about is your kid. All
Right.
you care about is what's going to do what's right for my kid.
Right. Right. And then all these sort of politics it just doesn't, the kid's just confused and doesn't know. At best, they're confused and just don't know, who do I listen to? What do I, and let's be real, like, I've had a lot of students who didn't want an IEC and their parents were really big on it. And then they were feeling really conflicted about, like, engaging in something that they didn't want to engage in, but also didn't want to let their parents down and felt pretty bad that their parents spent a lot of money on something that they weren't really taking advantage of. So, like, we got to find a way to make this win for the kids instead of getting
I have one school that the counselor works with me, but she's like, none of the other people on our team are going to work with any IEC. So it's good, like. But I want to shout out the Blake School in Minnesota. They've been great. They've been great at, like, if you got an IC, let's talk, let's collaborate, let's talk.
Yeah.
But I also understand, like, I've talked to school-based counselors that, like, why do I want to talk to someone who doesn't know anything and all they're trying to do is pump me for knowledge?
Right.
And, like, that's the other side of it, right? Like, every time when I've always said that, I'm always sort of talking with two competent professionals. And so it works really well. But I know enough from talking to other school-based counselors that they're talking with someone that's worked with like 20 people in their life or something.
Oh, at best, honestly.
Or maybe 10 or something. You know what I mean? And
yeah.
or whatever. And then they're just, it's like not a mutually beneficial. You've seen that, right, Julia? Like it wouldn't be in your best interest to talk to collaborate with a bunch of the IECs that you've talked about that have been the terrible ones. Like it's just not good use of your time, and it could be counterproductive.
Right. And it's like misinformation out there. Like some of the essays I get, I'm like, you could have done better asleep. Like, what is this?
Friends, this concludes part 1 of 3 of Julia and I taking on this very tough and nuanced question. We hope you'll join us next week for the next segment. Now, friends, let's hear another question from a listener that's a lot more succinct and terse and to the point, from Lisa and Lynda.
And now it's time for a question from one of our listeners.
Hey, Lynda. It's nice to be back with you with another question from a listener.
I love the QFLs.
I know. The people ask such amazing questions, and I really love this question, actually, because I think it's going to be helpful to a lot of families. This is from a dad, so let's hear what he is asking.
As we start to look at various universities for our rising senior, we want to easily compare and contrast different schools with an online tool. I would love to hear your team discuss the pros and cons of different online college comparison websites. Are some more accurate than others? Which ones provide the most robust overviews? Should we use more than one tool? And how do these tools obtain their data? Thanks so much.
All right. So, I bet you that, like, you were going to say that people should use more than one source. And I bet you this is going to, knowing you, it's going to involve a spreadsheet. But tell me if I'm right.
Well, most things involve a spreadsheet.
For those of us, not me, who can use a spreadsheet, yes, they do.
Yes. So I do. And I like this question, but I wish there was like such a perfect, easy answer. And I feel like it's one answer that I say all the time. It depends, because it really depends on what your students or your family's priorities are. And this is where the spreadsheet comes in, because there are a lot of great tools out there, some not so great. But I mean, it depends. If your student really wants to go somewhere that has rock climbing walls, I have not found a comparison website that will give me that information, or that has, what is it, a black box student theater, because they're really involved in that. That kind of stuff is tough to find. There are a bazillion websites out there that are going to give you acceptance rates, retention rates, cost of attendance, student to faculty ratios. That's the easy stuff.
Right. Yeah, I think that before you aggregate any data, you need to find what data you need to look for, and that's going to involve some soul searching on the part of the student, and just some like kind of very direct conversations with the family about what is important to us, what's important to the student, and some of those things are not going to be like a quantitative variable, like 72%. It's going to be a qualitative variable, and a lot of times, in order to assess a qualitative variable, you're probably going to have to dig deep, most likely into the school website, or maybe like the school's YouTube channel. And I always tell people, like, you would not believe what's on that school website. Everything. They tell you everything they do. It's amazing. It's such this great resource that people don't want to look at for whatever reason. And so once you make that spreadsheet, then you can go about getting the data. Some of the sites that I put down were just like, if your school uses application management software like Score or Naviance or Maya Learning. They have, they aggregate some research and some numbers on their niche or niche. Happily also has data that you can find, as well as College Navigator, College Scorecard, Big Future. And I guess I would add to this maybe AI, although you got to fact check AI. We got to fact check anything really, but it's possible that you could ask ChatGPT or Claude to, find some variables and put them in a table for you, and hopefully they're mostly accurate.
Yeah.
So that, that could be another way to go, but I wouldn't just rely on your AI for that.
Yeah, and I wouldn't rely just on one site either, because there's so much good information out there. There are parts of College Navigator that I just adore. I like sharing with families, like, let's see how many students actually completed this program, because it's really easy for a college to have on the front page, we offer a degree in underwater basket weaving, but then you realize
Nobody does it.
nobody does that.
Yeah.
So maybe they're not the best at that.
Yeah. I don't know too, because I think that College Navigator and College Scorecard, I am not sure if those are going to be continued to be updated, because I know that the department that was doing that got doged. And so I'm not sure what the future is on that.
We'll
So
see.
we might have to start to find some alternate sources for that kind of information.
We shall see. I know I just looked at it today, and a lot of College Navigator is being updated to Class of 24 information, which, I mean, a lot of these sites, there's going to be a lag, but I hope not, because those are some of my
Yeah,
favorites.
they're amazing sites, and
Yeah.
I do hope that I think I get a lot of value out of them. I'm sure families all across the United States get a lot of value out of them, and I hope that they continue.
Yeah.
But yeah, so yes, use more than one. What's robust depends upon your needs, and make your spreadsheet. That's the most important thing. Like, know what question you're asking.
Exactly.
Right? Cool. Thanks, Lynda.
Thanks, Lisa.
And thanks to the generosity of the Princeton Review for sending in that SpeakPipe question, you are going to get your choice of one of the following 4 books: College Admissions 101, Essays That Kicked Apps, The Best 390 Colleges, Princeton Review Digital SAT Prep. Now, in order to get your book, you just need to send me an email at mark@schoolmatch4u.com, put Princeton Book Giveaway in the subject line, and in the body of the email, put the title of the book you want and put the episode number where we discussed your question, and just share a brief description of the question that you asked.
And now this week's interview with a special guest.
Friends, it's the final part of Adrienne Amador-Oddi's interview with Lisa Ruff on Queen's University. And in part 2, Adrienne talks about the 2 programs that are very unique that Queen's offers. Adrienne talks about some of the initiatives and plans they have for the future, including a very exciting group of new majors they're rolling out for both undergrads and grad students. Adrienne talks about the type of student that does best at Queen's. Adrienne explains how merit scholarships work at Queen's. And Adrienne explains how to apply to Queen's. Listen and enjoy.
Is there like a program that you think is like a sleeper at Queen's that, should be getting more attention than it is right now?
Yeah, there are actually 2. So one is our music therapy program. We are one of the smallest schools in the country to offer music therapy as a major. And with the, growing interest in wellness and holistic care, I think students knowing that they can be in an incredibly individualized experience as they prepare to be music therapists is really helpful. That's a program that draws students from all over the world, often because we are small, and so they get the hands-on individualized attention from our faculty, but also in a city, so it's easier for students to get their internships that are required as part of the music therapy licensure program. The other program that I want to call out is our interior architecture and design program. Again, we're one of the smallest schools to offer something that's so nation specific, and it's growing in popularity, especially as so many more homes are being built in and around the area. A lot of professional opportunities for students there. It's not a full architecture program, so a bit more accessible for folks who are a little nervous about their physics preparation, there's a different approach we can take with IAD that allows people to really lean into different strengths. Certainly need to know some of the math to make some of that work, but really different kind of program and a lot of space to try things out.
Those both sound like amazing programs. What kind of things is Queens like aspiring to do in the future? Are there any new initiatives or things being built out?
Sure, that's a great question. I think a couple of things come to mind. We are really working on building out our wellness curriculum, our wellness opportunities, as we hear from the, incoming generation of students. There's just a lot of stuff that everyone is working through, and that's completely and totally okay. And what we have already serves students really well. And so we really see ourselves as being best in class in terms of how do you like set up your life so that you can live well, which is an easy question to ask and a really hard question to answer because there's so much noise in the world. There's so much pressure students and families are facing. And so we work really hard to kind of disrupt this sense of urgency, this sense of time famine, and to help people figure out what is going to be both fulfilling and helpful for them in the future. So I think that is the thing that we're already really good at, that we're kind of doubling down on. It helps to be in a really idyllic setting, so
It's so
that
beautiful. Yes, you're in
yeah.
the city, but it's so peaceful.
Right, right. You can like take two turns and see the skyline and feel the hustle and bustle, but on campus, like being surrounded by big old oak and magnolia trees, I mean, it does have its own sense of place, which can help create a sense of calm and reduce some of the urgency people are feeling. um, the other thing I will mention is again another doubling down on strengths, and that's like really getting into data analytics and continuing to evolve our curriculum as the data and analytics needs of the world evolve. So we launched an analytics major 2 years ago. We launched a master's in finance and analytics 2 years ago as well. And they are the fastest growing majors. They're the things we get asked about in terms of our career center, like skills people need. And with the undergraduate program, the director is actually a historian. And so he is
Oh,
really
cool.
right. And that gets at that interdisciplinarity. And it is very much a multidisciplinary program. So attracts students from a variety of other majors. They're adding additional coursework and concentrations so that you can see how in different areas, even something that feels very humanities oriented, very driven by reading large texts, like the analytics that comes from patterns in history and the ways in which we would share information and how over time. So I absolutely love that the director was is a history professor who's taking an analytical lens to history, but also helping students in other programs see how we use data to solve problems that the world is facing, to find solutions to complicated and messy questions. So seeing that growth is something that we certainly want to build upon going forward as well.
No, that sounds amazing. Now, what kind of student do you feel like does best at Queens?
The students who do best at Queens are students who are like leading with their hearts, right? They're driven, but not competitive or cutthroat. Students are incredibly curious here, but are able to get out of, what I might call airy-fairy academic land. And like there's some students who like absolutely need to be in airy-fairy academic land, incredibly cerebral students who like are going to be amazing researchers and go really deep at things. And we've got some students like that here at Queens, but the general student has a curiosity that they're pulling on some threads, and then they want to they want to get out of their head and do something with that. It's, students who are starting to figure things out, and need a little bit of a confidence boost. The student who's figuring out how to get B's by the end of high school and is hitting their stride and wants somebody to help them figure out like where their strengths are in the classroom. Like, we are so good at meeting that student and saying, "Oh, look at what you just recently did. Tell me about how that went for you and why it was such a great experience and so different from something else you experienced," and guiding them through these series of questions to reveal to the students in this collaborative partnership, "Oh, I am good at this and can get even better at it." So we're for students who haven't arrived yet but are looking for some help finding their way. Like if you've got a spark, we can light that fire.
That's great. Yeah, there are a lot of kids like that who maybe their transcript doesn't show their true potential. And it's great that there's, places that they can go where they can really nurture and develop that. I know we had talked about merit aid and financial aid. So how does that work at Queens?
Sure. So every student is considered for a merit scholarship when they apply. There's no extra application process. And those scholarships range from about $10,000 up to full tuition. The bigger amounts obviously get more and more competitive, and typically students are qualifying for between $20,000 and $30,000 in merit aid. And then for folks who are eligible, we ask for a FAFSA free application for federal student aid, and we'll add on top of merit scholarships based off of the need-based calculations for international students or students who can't access the FAFSA. We have another form that students and families can fill out to give us a sense of family finances so we can add grants. We don't use a lot of loans in our packages. We just go with the federal student loans if people are able and eligible for those. If not, they're not in packages at all.
Hmm.
And while we can't meet 100% of need, which we discussed at length, is a little squishy at best,
Hmm.
we can meet the needs of about 85% of our students. And so I hope for students and families as they're navigating processes, like, there's very specific things we have to do in order to say we meet 100% of need. But what you just heard me say is a majority of our students and families have their needs met. And I think that is incredibly important. And for many families, the price of Queens as a private university in a beautiful neighborhood in Charlotte, North Carolina, is often comparable to the residential experience at an in-state public. Our average price is between $25,000 and $35,000, depending on where a student is coming from. So I think that's important for families to hear as they're thinking about different options. Sometimes
Absolutely.
you said it earlier. Sometimes the private options are just as competitive in terms of price as the public options, sometimes even more affordable. Every university I've worked for has been a private university. And every year I have families say, "Oh my gosh, this is more affordable than I thought it was going to be." We certainly have people saying, "Oh my gosh, this is more expensive than I thought it would be too." So I don't
Well,
want to misrepresent the experience, but like the narrative that public is cheaper and more affordable and private is more expensive, doesn't always come to fruition
no,
for
no, it
families.
doesn't. So, I mean, you've made a very compelling case for going to Queens. How do kids apply? Like, what kinds of requirements do you have?
Sure. So students can apply via the Common Application or our Queen's institutional application. We ask you the same questions that the Common Application asks, but some students would prefer to do that. So choose your own adventure. The we really just need your application and your high school transcript, and oftentimes with the transcript there comes somebody from your school who says you are going to be a good person in a college community. Essays are optional. That's new for us this year. I found essays were creating a lot of anxiety for students, and more often than not, weren't really telling us a lot more beyond what we were getting in the application, which includes the activities you're pursuing and that you're into. So about 80% of students still wrote an essay or sent us an essay, but we did make it optional this year for students because it's a high pressure moment that doesn't give us a lot of extra stuff. And then recommendations also optional. About half of our students will send additional recommendations. We're going to look at everything you send and use the things that are going to be helpful to you in our review process. So we don't trust that students know exactly, is an essay going to be helpful or harmful to me? If you send us an essay and it's great, we're going to use that. If you send us an essay and it's not your best foot forward, we're going to say, you know what? We've got all of this other information here that is giving us a fuller picture. So we're not going to use additional materials you're sending to, make our assessment lower than it may have been otherwise, because every school has different requirements. So it's hard for a student to know how something is going to be used. And our orientation in the review process is, what have you done and how do we have the resources here to support you in your next step? So we're looking for the ways you're going to plug in. We're looking for ways to celebrate you. We are looking for ways to affirm the experiences students have had.
So, is the Common App essay optional, or is it just the
Hmm.
supplemental essays that are optional? Oh, the Common App essay is optional. Ooh.
Yes.
So, yeah, that's interesting. Because I know so many kids get so stressed out and stuck there.
Yes.
Wow, that's great. And then your test optional except for the nursing program, and that's to
Correct.
satisfy the North Carolina Nursing Board, pretty much.
Yes. Yes. And so if students don't want to take a standardized test, but or an SAT or ACT but do want nursing, they can just apply as a continuing student to the nursing program, and we'll help them prepare for the TEAS exam, which is a nursing specific exam. So there's still an option for people who don't want to take an SAT or ACT for any number of reasons, or can't take an SAT or ACT for any number of reasons. We won't hold that against you. You'll just have to come in through a different pathway.
Well, this has been amazing. Thank you so much for all of your information, both about Queens and helping us try to figure out some of the financial aid confusion that exists out there. I
Yeah.
really appreciate it. Thank you.
Yes. Thanks so much for having me. And I hope families know questions are helpful and they should ask whenever. And somebody at a university should be going to find answers to
All
help.
right. Words to live by. Thank you.
Yes. Have a great day.
Friends, on Monday's episode, I'm going to talk about this new tax bill that passed the House and the Senate. And I'm not going to get into all of the ramifications when it comes to things like Medicare and what you SNAP programs and things like that. I'm just going to focus on higher ed. I'm just going to focus on what are the ramifications for higher ed. And I'm just going to do an overview of everything. I plan on having Travis Hornsby to come back on our podcast to do a super deep dive on loan forgiveness and the student loan portion. So I'll just barely touch on that. I'll let Travis handle the details. I don't know anybody more accomplished on that topic. We've had him on about 6 years ago. He was fantastic. And so we'll have him do that. But that's what I'm going to talk about on Monday. And then Chris Terr will be back for part 2 of 4, where we're just talking about a range of topics related to college admissions. Friends, I'm kind of nostalgic when it comes to restaurants. There's a couple chains I like. I like Texas Roadhouse, and I do like P.F. Chang's, and Cheesecake Factory's okay, and Longhorn Steakhouse. I got a few chains I like, but I really like, when I travel, I like to just eat like privately owned locales like the locals go to. That's just kind of what I do. And I got a couple right in our hometown here. These places have been around from like 50s, 60s, well, maybe even earlier. Oz Pizza in the town that I'm at. And there's this little diner called Judy's. It's a hole in the wall. And I'm kind of an ambiance guy, to be honest. I was surprised that I would go to a place like this, but I kind of like to frequent it. And it's more of a breakfast place, although it's kind of like 5 to 2 are the hours. So sometimes I'll go there and just have my Southern breakfast, like your grits and cheese eggs or whatever. And I went to go, maybe like a little while ago, and it was closed down. I couldn't believe it. I'm like, Judy's, no, this is like a staple in Fairburn. And then all of a sudden it popped up again. So they got a much better location. The town I live in is Fairburn, Georgia. It's growing fast. So they got they just moved to a much better location. So I went there for the first time. It had been literally closed for 18 months. Went there earlier today. And while I was waiting in line, get my veggie platter this time, they have a new sign up. And I love this sign. And I'm always on lookup for things like this because I think they're teachable moments. And this is what the sign said. Attitude is everything. Pick a good one. Did you catch that? Attitude is everything. Pick a good one. See you on Monday, friends. And that's our show. A big thank you to you, our listeners, for tuning in this week. If you find this podcast helpful, please follow us and you will get every single episode as soon as they are released. If you want to support our podcast, you can click the share button and send it to your friends and acquaintances. You can say positive things about your college-bound kid on your social media feed. And you can help us stay commercial-free and pay our staff by donating on the yourcollegeboundkid website. You can write a review for us on Apple or Spotify. And if you have a question or a recommendation, just go to speakpipe.com/YCBK, hit the orange button, and speak. We will do our best to get your question in your own voice on an upcoming episode. I am the producer of the podcast, and I live in Metro Atlanta. We have a fantastic team that has over 200 years of admissions and counseling experience. Shout out to our co-host, Dr. Lisa Ruff in North Carolina, Susan Tree in Pennsylvania, Vince Garcia in California, Julia Esquivel in Massachusetts, Lynda Depker in Missouri, Andy Strickler, the Chief Enrollment Officer at Connecticut College, New London, Connecticut, Hillary Dickman, an Admission Officer at Colorado College in Colorado Springs, and our International Admissions Expert, Kevin Newton in Dallas, Texas. Our sensational sound engineer is Nemanja Motvich. Our amazing music is from Victor Allen Weeks. Marketing designs from Kimberly Bloss. Our reliable webmaster is Stylionis Dimitru. Website updates are done by Joyce Stucker. Our image editor is Vlad Honchar. If you want to have a coaching session with me, just text me at 404-664-4340. If you want to reach someone else on our team, all of our bios with contact info can be found at yourcollegeboundkid.com under the About YCBK tab. If you want to get our free monthly YCBK newsletter, YCBK Plus, it is also under the About YCBK tab. If you want to see our recommended books and websites, they are on our website under the Resources tab. While you're on our website, check out our hundreds of interviews in their entirety. Check out our college spotlights, our blog, and our upcoming events. We think of you as our listening family, and we look forward to meeting with you every single Monday and every single Thursday.